Number 7. Number 7. Number 7. At some point, we will get this down to a manageable length. How about there? You drew the picture of the aquarium?
That's the wrong.
Oh, which one's it supposed to be?
13.
What did I write on here? Is this 12? Oh, kids, this could be trouble. This is supposed to be 13A? Uh-oh. That's gonna be trouble. Right here, Riverside. Which is what? Saxon? Where do you go, Saxon Math? Where are you? Shouldn't take long. Tests. What'd you say? 13? 13? 13? That's gonna be trouble. Oh, look, there it is. My favorite tool? Mr. Snippet. Snippet good, they say. Uh-oh. Can I tell you today is not progressing as I would like? Well, we can talk about it for a minute. 13A. Let's see if this works. 13A. Good. 13B. Is that here? What number did you say? 7?
Yep.
7 on the right one?
Yep.
Just one page.
No.
13A. 13A. 7? Did I copy the same one twice? No. Seven, solve and graph. What gave you trouble with this, sir? How do you solve this, ladies and gentlemen? X plus 2 is less than 3. I'm not sure where, it's just like an equation. If that was an equation and said x plus 2 equals 3, what would you get? And just subtract 2. Subtract 2, x is less than 1. And then when you graph it, at 1, there's no equal sign, so it's an open circle. It doesn't include 1, but it starts at 1. This little arrow, it's everything less than, points this way, so it points this way, and it's everything less than. Asked and answered. Forging ahead, time is wasting here. Jason? 8. Perfect. Again, a quick little review. What is generic form in slope-intercept is y equals mx plus b, where the letter m is the slope of the line, and the letter b is where it crosses the y-axis. So if you look at this thing, where is it crossing the y-axis? What number is that on the y-axis? There's 0, that's -1. So b has to be -1. You just now need to find what the slope of that line is. And to do that, you make a right triangle. You find, let's see if I can go a little bigger here. You need to pick 2 points on that triangle that cross both an x and a y point. For example, right here's one. You can't pick that because it's not crossing a horizontal line, it crosses a vertical one. You can pick that one and you can pick this one. You make a right triangle out of it. And slope is how high is that triangle? It's 1 high over how wide is that triangle? 2 units wide. It's going uphill, so it's a positive slope. So, if you read my thing, y equals 1/2 x minus 1. Did it a lot last year. You could have picked this point to be your other point in your triangle, made a really big triangle, but it'll still reduce to 1/2 because you get 2/4. 2/4 still gives you 1/2. Or you could have picked this point here and made a super ginormous triangle. You'll get 3/6. You'll still get 1/2. Y equals mx plus b. Forging ahead, there's got to be something. Jenna.
I think number 5.
Is that here, there, or somewhere else? How do I do number 5? I think I should make this smaller because it'll help it a little bit. The speedometer on Murray's car shows the speed in both miles and kilometers per hour, using 1 kilometer as the equivalent for 1 mile. First thing I would do is write this down. They give you your conversion ratio, 1.6 kilometers equals 1 mile. Then I write down the rate. What is my rate? My rate is 80 kilometers per hour. 80 kilometers per hour. And then the question, are you changing kilometers to something else or hours to something else? Anybody? Keith? Kilometers. So you need to multiply this by, we call it the unit multiplier, the conversion ratio. I want kilometers to cross off and be changed into miles. So where does kilometers have to go in order for it to cross off on the new one? Isabel? On the bottom. What has to go on top? Miles. How do I know what numbers go with them? Because of this right here. 1.6 is in front of kilometers, and 1 is in front of miles. I have now crossed off the labels. This is 80. I have now crossed off the labels. My answer will be in 80 miles per hour. I just need to do the math. What happens with this? It's 80 over 1.6 when you multiply those fractions, which means you need to divide 80 by 1.6. 1.6 into 80 is the same as 16 into 800, move the decimals over, which ends up being 50. You get 50 miles per hour, 50 mph. You're crossing off labels. All info needed is given. Mr. Riley, how are the fingers? Are they lighter today? Not much. But by the time all your skin falls off, because your skin replaces itself, what, every week or something? What number? 3. Number 3. A vertical yardstick, oh, this is a good one. 24 inches at the same time that a flagpole casts a shadow 16 feet long. How tall is the flagpole? This is similar triangles, people. I would start off with this. Here is your yardstick and its shadow. And you've got a flagpole. I guess I should have drawn that. And its shadow. Fill in the numbers there. What does it say? Well, first of all, this is a yardstick. So how high is it from here to here? A yard, 36 inches. What's the shadow? Because this is the sun. How wide is the shadow? 24 inches. The flagpole casts a shadow 16 feet. So that's right here, 16 feet. You want to know what this is. So what are you going to do? You are going to make a ratio box. And you are going to compare the small triangle to the big triangle. What are we comparing? We have their heights and we have their shadows. The height of the small one is 36 inches. Its shadow is 24 inches. The height of the big one we don't know. And the width of the big one is 16 feet, or whatever it is, yards. That's fine. So then you just have to find the missing thing. Do you have a question, Brianna? And again, you have 36 over 24 equals what number over 16? 12 goes into both these, so you could reduce this to 3 over 2. 2 times 8, 3 times 8 is 24 feet is what we're measuring. This would be 24 feet. These can be in different measurements as long as these are in the same measurements. And these are in the same measurements. 24 feet. Draw your triangles, do the ratio box. It's not incredibly difficult, just extremely difficult. Altenberg.
15.
15. On the bottom or on the top? Somebody's always in the way. Perfect. Me being the teacher in me says, I'll bet if you made a mistake on this one, you said that 4 to the 0 power is either 0 or 4. What'd you say it was? Aubrey?
0.
No. Anything to the 0 power is 1. No matter what it is always 1. Anything to the first power is itself. 2 squared is 4. 1 to the third power, 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. And it's a negative 1. How about this? Let me ask you a question. What if this was 1 squared? Would that make it positive or not? Negative 1 squared. Is that positive 1 or negative 1? If I have negative 1 squared, what does that simplify to? Ooh, Grace?
Pass.
No, you got 50-50. Positive 1 or negative 1?
Positive.
Wrong.
Negative.
Correct. The exponent only goes for the number in front. It's 1 times 1, which is 1, with that. This is a negative 1. If it looked like this, then the negative gets squared. They both would have to be in parentheses, and then you get a positive 1. Negative 1, positive 1. So when you do the math here, 1 plus 3 is 4, plus 4 is 8, minus 1 is a whopping 7. Hopefully that was the answer I said. Am I going to do 16 while I'm there? Do I hear a yes?
Yes.
I would say if I had to guess that, you want to do thing. First thing you want to do is, well, you could do your numbers first. 2 goes into 6 3 times. That should be kind of a no-brainer. Now what? Somebody tell me what they do, because I can do this a bunch of different ways, but I don't remember which way I told you specifically to do it. Elijah? Okay, so if you have a negative exponent, we don't deal with those, so you want to make it a positive exponent. And the way you do that is simply by removing it. If it's on the top, you move it to the bottom, and it becomes positive. Chanel. Okay, now they're all positive, you can combine them. On top you get y times y, which is y squared. X to the 5th doesn't combine with anything. And on bottom you're left with an x squared and an x squared, which is x to the 4th and 1 single y. Now that's not the answer, because if you have the same thing on top as on bottom, they can cross out. You have 2 y's on top and 1 y on bottom. One of them will cross off, so you're left with just a y on top. You have 4 x's on the bottom and 5 x's on top, so what's going to happen? 4 of them will cross off with 4 of them up there, and you're left with 1 x left over on top. Did I do something wrong? Okay, if the x to the 5th would have been on the bottom, then that x would be on the bottom, but it's not. They all get left on the top, so it stays on the top there. Isabel?
The number is 12.
12? Definitely where 12 would be. If angle B, I'm guessing this has to go in the picture somewhere. What's that? If angle B is, what did it say? 61 degrees, then let's measure what? DAB? DAB, this one. Anybody? DAB. DAB. Wait, do we have to find the, let me think about this for a minute here. What is the area? Oh, it's a parallelogram, so the sides are parallel. Well, this is probably what I think about. Let me see, let me look at the other questions here first. Area 61, what's the measured angle DAB? DAB. All right. Since you've got all those different lines there, you can pick whatever shape you want to find the angles. I would say this is probably your best bet. What if I look at this? Why is it so far off? All the way over here. What if I made this? Wow. If I made this my shape, or did we talk about? I can't remember if we talked about parallelograms at that point. What lesson does this come? What's it say? What lesson does that come from? What does that say? Sure. How about this? Write this down because I don't know if you remember this or not here. When you have parallelograms, they call them adjacent angles. Are what are called complementary. Complementary, E-R-Y, which means they have to add up to 90 degrees. Which means if you have this, I'm going to erase this because it was not a little big there. If you look at this parallelogram, adjacent angles mean this angle and this angle are adjacent. And it said angle B was what? Oh wait, I'm sorry. These angles are supplementary. Let's change that. Which means they add up to 180 degrees. Be bad. Which means this angle plus this angle have to add up to 180 degrees. And the reason for that is this. Any four-sided shape, just like any triangle adds up to 180 degrees, any four-sided shape, their angles have to add up to 360 degrees. So these two here have to add up to half of them because they're equal over there. Just know that. You're just going to take 61 from 180 degrees, and you'll end up with 119 degrees. Just write that down in your notes.
I have a question for you, but I need to see your computer, I need to see mine, doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
About running web, I'm trying to set up sooner algorithm.
Oh, which would mean this in case they ask. Adjacent angles are supplementary. Vertical or opposite angles are equal to each other. If this is 61 degrees, if it's a parallelogram, this would be 61 degrees. This would be 119 degrees, that would be 119 degrees. Just write that down. Area of the parallelogram, do we have to do that? Because area of parallelogram is just base times height. I don't know why they did that. area of the parallelogram is just base times height. You multiply this times whatever line is perpendicular to it. What line is perpendicular to it? This one. The area of this parallelogram is 10 times 7, 70 inches. Not 10 times 8, because that's not its height. The height has to go straight up and form a right angle with the base. Base, height, 10 times 7 is 70. Is that not what you're gonna ask me? I thought I nailed it. Yes, Brianna?
Number 4.
El número el cuatro. That's the Spanish. The sales tax rate is 7.5%. What is the sales tax on $164? Remember, tax and tip are always multiplication. I want to know what 7.5% of $164 is. So I have to do this, $164 times 7.5%. But we gotta figure out what 7.5% is as a multiplication thing. What is 7.5% as a decimal? Well, if you made 7.5% into a decimal as a percent, it's 7.5%. What is 7.5% as a decimal? Jason?
0.075.
Right, you have to move the decimal back 2 places. So it's 0.075. $164 times 0.075. That's 7.5%. So they don't ask you, they just ask you for the sales tax. So 20, 2, 32, 8, 0, 28, 2, 42, 44, 11, 0, 0, 3, 2, 1, blast off, 1, 2, 3. Looks like $12.30. You could have left your double zeros in there and got all sorts of big numbers there, but you don't have to. You multiply it all that. Was that right? Am I right or am I right? Jenna Nervous.
I made you number 6.
We already did 6, didn't we? I was hoping. Number 6. Wait, why does this say 16? This is number 6? That one? What is the length of a diagonal rectangle that is 24 inches long and 10 inches wide? Did you draw the rectangle?
Yeah.
Jenna? Did you label it 10 inches by 24 inches? Jenna?
Yes.
Did you draw a diagonal, Jenna?
Yes.
What does that make here for you and for me? What is that little shape here called? That is a right triangle. Anytime you see right triangles and you're looking for diagonals and that sort of stuff, you should think what? Pythagorean theorem. So you'll look for a 10 and a 24 and there is no such thing. Which means what? You punt, do it out, or look to see if it's a ratio. Can you reduce 10 and 24?
Yes.
What can you do to them?
Divide by 2.
You can cut them both in half. If you cut this in half, you get 5. You cut this in half, you get 12. There's a new smaller triangle that's in the same ratio as the big one. Is there a 5, 12 one? Which is what? So this is 13. Is 13 your answer? No, that 13 is the answer to the small triangle. You have to then re-explode it and get the answer to the big one. Which means if you shrunk this by half, you have to double it to get back to where you should be. So this ends up being a big 26. 26 inches wide from small to big. Whew. Altenberg?
20.
We took this test last year, by the way. I don't know how we did. Well, maybe we didn't take this exact one, I don't remember. Did you? You should have kept your, yeah. Aubrey, what do you have to do first? Any equation. What if it didn't have fractions in it? What if it was 7x plus 3 equals 9? What would you do to that to solve for x? Anybody? Want to get x by itself. Elijah?
Subtract 3/4.
Right. Yeah, you always get rid of the addition subtraction stuff first by doing the opposite. So here I would subtract 3. It's not 3, it's actually 3/4, so you have to subtract 3/4, which makes this go away, and then I have to subtract 3/4 from this, which as a common denominator is 6/8. You subtract, you get 3/8. So now you're left with 7/8 x equals 3/8. And then, for the first time this year, if you have a fraction in front of a letter and you're trying to solve the equation, what are you going to do? I know I've said this 1,000 times. Winkleman says,
Let's multiply.
you multiply by 8/7, because that makes this all cross off. You have to do the same thing over here, multiply by 8/7. The 8's cross off, and you are left with 3/7. Flip and multiply. Been doing it since day 2. Brooklyn, what are you copying down? You copying the Pythagorean triples down?
Mhm.
But they're up on the wall.
So I can have my home to get on the paper.
What?
So I can have my home to get all the papers.
Oh, you could ask me for one, I'll give you a copy.
It's a lot of fun anyway.
Oh, you got nothing better to do. Matty Ron?
Number 11.
I am here to make your life as easy as humanly possible. Is that on this paper? Is it up here? First one? Nope, second one? Oh, third one. What is the area of triangle ABC? ABC, it's the same thing, Maddie. What's the formula for area of a triangle? Half base times height. Well, we already found the base and the height for the parallelogram. It was 10 times 7. Triangle is going to be the same because it has the same base. It goes from here to here, and it actually has the same height as well. It's still that 7 inches for the height. So it's going to be the 70 cut in half. It's 1/2 of 7 times 10. Area equals 1/2 base times height. We already found the base and the height. 1/2 of the base was 10. The line perpendicular to that was 7. Half of 70 is 35, whatever it was, which is squared. I can sleep. I'll wake you up. That's the floor. Not you, somebody else. A person you would never believe, by the way. Riley, 17. Oh, we haven't talked about this. I'm incredibly surprised nobody's asked me about this. Somebody, what am I gonna say? Jason?
It's a negative exponent, you flip it.
Yep. We don't deal well with negative exponents, but when you have a negative exponent with a fraction, the fix is very easy. You just flip the bottom and the top numbers, and the exponent becomes positive. Now the beautiful thing about a 1 exponent is anything to the first power is itself, so it doesn't change it. You're going to end up with 3/2 minus 2/3. Common denominator is 6. This is what, 9/6 minus 4/6 is 5/6. Shazam. If that would have been a -2, then this would have gotten squared. It would be 4/9, but it wasn't, so it ain't, and it won't be probably for tomorrow. Most people will be happy. Time is running out. This, that, the other thing. Somebody, button. Who's got Matty Rock?
18.
Number 18. Hoping somebody would ask for those. Is it both an 18? Scientific notation, multiplication doesn't get any easier than this. You multiply the left parts. 3 times 4 is 12. You write down your times 10. What happens when I multiply the right parts together? what is 10 to the negative fourth times 10 to the negative third? This does get a little complicated, by the way. What do? You add their exponents together. If you add a negative 4 and a negative 3 together, you get a whopping negative 7. Now, unfortunately, I can't leave it like that because it's not in scientific notation yet. What do I have to do? Lainey, I'm going to,
Change 12 and 4 by 2.
the decimal starts here. I need to make it between 1 and 10, so that decimal has to move there and make it 1.2. Well, when I change this number, my exponent changes as well, and here's where people get mixed up. You think about this as being kind of balanced out. I made this smaller by one place. I need to make this bigger. They kind of balance out by one place. And a negative 7 plus 1 is a negative 6. Think about it as being some sort of a balance sort of thing. You do the opposites for it. We are getting close. Nobody's going to ask about this one here. Oh, nobody hardly got that one right. 5/12 says a percent as a decimal. What's the only thing you really need to do? You need to divide the bottom into the top. Which means you need to take 12, take it into 5. That'll get you the decimal and it'll get you the percent at the same time. How many times does 12 go into 50? 4 times, which is 48. How many times does 12 go into 20? Once, which is 12. How many times does 12 go into 80? 6 times, which is 72. And look what happens. You get 80 again. You'll keep getting this. That'll give you the decimal, which is 0.41 repeater 6. But that doesn't, how do I go from that to getting 41 2/3%? Probably the best way to think about that is once you get past this 41, what was your remainder down here? You need to take that 8 and put it above 12. What fraction is 8/12? 2/3. Or if you know that 6 repeater is the same as the fraction 2/3, you can just do it from there. But one of the two ways, you can't just put 6 over 12 or whatever. We don't do this. We don't do 41.6 repeater as a percent. So you really need to change that into that fraction right there. I guess if you have more